I know many of you have been alongside this crazy 600-day journey we've been on since we first launched just a little bit over, I guess, about a year and a half ago. But in that time, and so many of you have been alongside us building 20 different policy centers, having 160 team members on our staff, 13 former cabinet officials, 3 former governors, over 40 senior administration officials from the last White House and administration. So many of you are part of our America First Agenda policy book rollout, giving an agenda to the American people that truly puts America first. It does not look at party or color or anything else, bringing the America First agenda directly to the American people with 38,000 supporters online, 160 staff, as I mentioned, 20 different policy centers, launching our Save America Coalition, our American Leadership Initiative to get ready for the next White House, launching our America First Women's Agenda, the Hispanic Initiative. Friday here in this room, we'll be hosting and celebrating Black History Month with some of the greatest pioneers for the America First Agenda from the African American community. It really has been a remarkable 600 plus days, and I'm so grateful to everyone who's been a part of that. So I thank you. When the great Linda McMahon, the chairman of our board, who's probably watching on live stream, thank you, Linda, alongside Larry Kudlow, also from the White House and currently on Fox Business, when we, with others, began to map out what would then become the America First Agenda in late 2020 and early 2021, the America First Policy Institute, issues like the growing threat posed by China was one of the very top issues on our plate that we wanted this new organization, if in fact it came to fruition, to really address. Never before in the history of our nation have we faced an adversary like China. We have stared down and defeated military threats. We won the day against those who sought to sow economic devastation on our country and its people. The threat of the PRC threat takes us back to a full spectrum threat, military and economic alike, unseen since the birth of our republic. And we need the wisdom of the founders then to guide us now. I am just young enough to remember the Cold War. America and her allies were united against the threats posed to us and our friends by the Soviet Union and its evil empire then. But never during any of those decades was the United States economy tied to products, materials, or production directly controlled by the Soviet Union. Today, you can't buy a smartphone, a car, or even a Tylenol without the finished product or many of its key components directly coming to our shores from China. At the same time, while China influences our supply chains and puts shackles around our economy, its military, both overtly and covertly, seeks to influence great swaths of Asia, the Pacific, and in many other areas around the world. They steal technology from our companies, then bankrupt that company and use that technology against the United States, her men and women in uniform, and those who cherish freedom around the world. In recent days, our nation has been casting one eye into the heavens, wondering when the next spy balloon will fly overhead. But make no mistake, those balloons are just a small sample of the work being led by the Chinese Communist Party to control our society, our children, and eventually our way of life. For decades, our country was slow to recognize that threat and inept in its response. That all changed when Donald J. Trump entered the White House. He recognized the threat, he confronted the CCP, and he made sure that American companies, American workers, and Americans' way of life always stood first. We were so right. Even the Biden team was compelled to follow us generally in their policies. We set the terms for the first bipartisan national security consensus in Washington, D.C. in a generation. Unfortunately, the current administration has failed in the execution of those policies, with the Chinese spy balloon debacle representing only a small fraction of those failures, which is what brings us to today. Since the current administration has moved away from its responsibilities to protect us, this duty in many ways now falls to America's governors and the states. Today, the America First Policy Institute is honored to welcome our nation's newest leader in this fight, Governor Kristi Noem. She is a governor and an example of what really can be done when the states and their leaders begin to use the tools at their disposal to protect our citizens. She started a movement when she banned the Chinese spyware app TikTok from government devices with an executive order in late 2022. Dozens of states and the federal government have quickly followed her lead. She is also leading the effort to block nations that hate America, like Communist China, from purchasing American agricultural land. As we speak, an innovative bill, thanks to her leadership, is making its way through the state legislature in South Dakota that effectively blocks the CCP control of agriculture land in South Dakota. This is a model for the rest of the country in the truest sense of our founders' vision under the 10th Amendment. She is a rancher, a farmer, a small business owner, a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. Governor Noem's grit and desire to serve propelled her from the South Dakota legislature to the United States Congress, and now the first woman to be elected governor of her home state, the great state of South Dakota, and just reelected in a huge landslide, I might add. Please help me welcome Governor Kristi Noem.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Well, thank you for that warm welcome. That means the world to me. And I want to thank you all for having a leader here that talks cows on the way in the door. So we were bonding a little bit over our rural heritage and Herefords as well. Yes, that's true. Thank you all for having me this afternoon. It means the world to me to get this opportunity to talk to you about the gift that this country is and the threats that we face around the world. My name is Kristi Noem. I am the governor of South Dakota. For those of you who don't necessarily know the difference between the two Dakotas, North Dakota has oil, a lot of it, and South Dakota has Mount Rushmore. And I think we got the better end of that deal. So we're pretty happy to be the home to that incredible monument. When you think of South Dakota, you might picture fields of soybeans, corn, rolling hills full of cattle. That's true. You might even think about the gorgeous Black Hills or that historic carved mountain of Mount Rushmore. If you can't picture those in your mind right now, then you should probably come visit us. In a lot of ways, that carved mountain in the Black Hills of South Dakota is a symbol of American freedom. And it's something that we and our people in our state take very seriously. It represents the four faces of leaders that have led this country. They fought for and they expanded our nation's founding principles, the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, George Washington fought a war to secure those ideals for us. President Jefferson famously, he wrote them down. President Teddy Roosevelt, who's personally one of my favorite presidents, he was an adventurer, but he also sent a navy around the world to show us how strong that freedom made us. And President Lincoln, well, he fought to bring that freedom to every single individual that lives here. I'm so proud that South Dakota is the home to such a beacon of freedom. And in the last 3 years, we've become a symbol of freedom to the rest of the world for a different reason entirely. We are setting an example now today by drawing a blueprint for a state-led response to Communist China. We first drew that blueprint in South Dakota during the COVID-19 pandemic. We expanded it then by banning TikTok from state government devices. And we're going to add to that blueprint by blocking the Chinese Communist Party from buying South Dakota ag land, from participating in state contracts, and from doing business and infiltrating our communications companies. When you think about our state, you maybe haven't always thought about Communist China. That's a good thing. We like that. We don't want foreign evil governments to be our neighbors. We prefer they stay our enemies because they hate us. And we don't want nations that hate us to infiltrate and to be a part of our way of life. Make no mistake that China, the Chinese Communist Party, is trying to infiltrate every single aspect of American life. We have a president and we have an administration here in Washington that has no interest in stopping them. Just this month, you've all been paying attention to how we have a Chinese spy balloon that spent days hovering over our nation and over our homeland. And what did President Biden do? He lied to the American people. He stood up that week and told us that the economy was strong. He also attended a Democrat National Committee rally. He did nothing to stop the Chinese for what they were doing from spying on us that had already crossed our entire country from west to east. In fact, I was not informed it crossed my state until it had already been through. But when the time came for him to deliver his State of the Union address, President Biden had the attention of the entire world on him, and he waited 58 minutes to even bring up China. And he didn't mention the incredible threat that they were to our country during that time. Folks, it is clear that President Biden is not going to take action to keep us safe. Governors have to step up and we have to take the lead. And that's exactly what we're doing in South Dakota. And it's what I'm here to talk to all of you about today. South Dakota has stood up to the threat that is posed by communist China in three major ways. I mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic, also by our action to block the Chinese companies like TikTok from doing business in South Dakota. We're also going to block Chinese purchases of land in our state, specifically as it relates to agricultural land, because that is what they are targeting. This is the blueprint the rest of the nation needs to follow. More freedom, less China. Now, America does need to come first. There's no question. That just means that we need to prioritize ourselves when we're making decisions in the future. It means prioritizing America's foundational truths and our foundational and fundamental rights. America's most foundational truth is freedom. It's our government's experiment in self-government. Our freedom is antithetical to the ruling Chinese communist regime. Their people no longer even have the freedom to elect their own leaders. They only know power. They only know government control. China's goal is very simple. They want to dominate the world, and they've been planning this for hundreds of years. But to achieve that world power, they will have to take down the United States of America. In pursuit of this goal, they have manipulated their currency for years. They have stolen American intellectual property. They've treated us unfairly in trade agreements. They've bought up our debt. They've purchased our food supply chains. They've even dramatically increased their strength in their own military. They have begun an aggressive campaign to win nations across the globe to their cause. We've seen them invest in third world countries and other countries desperate for growth, and they've built them ports and roads and bridges, all with the agenda to control them and to control the world and the world's food supply. They've manipulated every situation to their own benefit. They've lied about the virus and their response to it, and they used trusted international organizations to give legitimacy to their lies. The Chinese Communist Party not only exported the COVID-19 virus to the world, they exported totalitarian lockdowns as seemingly the only way that you could fight it. Country after country, state after state, nearly every government locked down because they were told that there was no other choice. Well, listen, South Dakota made a very different choice. In many ways, throughout this pandemic, I did what every other governor did. I studied the science and the facts and the data that we all had available to us. I was on conference calls for hundreds of hours with other governors, with epidemiologists, with medical experts, learning everything that I could and understanding what we knew to be true about the virus. I also took it a step further. I spent a lot of time with my general counsel, with constitutional attorneys. I wanted to know what authority I had as governor, but also what authority I did not have as governor. Because I believe that when a leader oversteps their authority, especially in a time of crisis, that's when you break this country. I did not have the authority to issue mandates or lockdowns. I don't believe any governor had that authority. In South Dakota, we respected the Constitution. We respected the foundation and the liberty that our nation was built on. We respected freedom. We trusted our people that they would exercise personal responsibility to make the best decisions for themselves and for their families, and I did not lock my people down or mandate anything. In fact, we were the only state in the country that never once ordered a single business or church to close. In fact, I didn't even define what an essential business was or a non-essential business was because I don't believe that governors have the authority to tell you that your business isn't essential. The results speak for themselves. We in South Dakota came out of the pandemic with the strongest economy in America, the fastest growing incomes in the country, and we have the fastest growth in new housing developments as well. Today, our population is growing at 5 times the national average. Now, remember, South Dakota does not have beaches, and we do not have beautiful Januaries to use to recruit people to our state. People come to our state because they want to be free. They picked up their lives and their families and they moved and they came. And we're breaking records for tourism year after year, too, because we told our story. As our state's revenues are so strong this year, I'm ready to deliver the largest tax cut to our people that we've had in the entire state's history. Now, we did not follow the communist model. We did not use the pandemic as an excuse to grow our state's power. And when other states saw that our example was working, they unwound their lockdowns. They declared themselves open for business too. How long would it have taken our nation to recover from this pandemic if we had not had South Dakota's example? How long would we have continued to cripple our economy if states did not slowly start to realize that there was another path? Thankfully, we'll never have to answer that question. And for that reason, America has retained our economic edge over communist China. Truly, at the time, I did not believe that South Dakota's choices would be that unique. I didn't anticipate that we would be setting an example for the rest of the country. I definitely didn't realize that we would be such a contrast for communist China. But that's exactly what happened because of the actions that we took. Our state, our country, and our world are better off. Now, COVID-19 wasn't the only thing that China exported in 2020. In fact, in the first quarter of 2020, TikTok broke the record for the most downloads in a 3-month period. 315 million worldwide users downloaded this app between January and March. And TikTok has consistently remained the most downloaded app in the world ever since. Let's face it, Americans got bored when the lockdowns came, and TikTok made them laugh. That's a good thing, right? Wrong. TikTok's worldwide users have nearly doubled since 2020. And here's the problem. Every single phone that downloads that app essentially is a new spy device for the Chinese Communist Party. They use it to gather data on the American people. They're manipulating their algorithms to control us. They have the ability to track our keystrokes, to study us, and to gather our financial information. It is potentially the greatest cybersecurity threat that our nation has ever faced. Now, South Dakota put a stop to it. This past November, just after Thanksgiving, I signed an executive order that banned TikTok for state government devices. We decided that South Dakota would have no part in the intelligence gathering operations of the Chinese Communist Party, and the order took effect immediately. It prohibited state employees, agencies, and contractors from downloading the app on their phones or on their computer devices or visiting any website on state-owned or state-leased devices, and if they did do that, it would be a criminal offense. As a state, we hold the secure data of hundreds of thousands of South Dakotans. Citizens in our state, all of their personal information is in our agencies and departments because of the programs and the interfaces that we have with them. I hope that other states will follow this action as well, that they would follow our lead, and they did. Congress took action too. I was thankful for how quickly our nation followed our leadership. Just a couple of months later, we have over 30 states that have taken action against TikTok. We have Congress has banned it for U.S. government devices as well, and Republican and Democrat governors have followed South Dakota's lead. South Dakota drew the blueprint, and now other people have taken action. We took one of China's largest spying tools off the table and unavailable. And we made countless of Americans aware of the threat that TikTok has in their lives every single day in the process. Now, we're not done yet. TikTok is not the only Chinese company that poses a threat to our national security. Other telecommunications companies can present a similar threat to this and to our data security. Frankly, we should not be sending taxpayer dollars to nations that hate us. So this past month, we took further action in South Dakota to protect our taxpayers from communist China. I signed an executive order that banned state government from doing business with 6 countries that hate us. that are evil, and it includes China. The order bans state government from doing business with certain telecommunications companies that are associated with these governments. It also blocks us from doing state contracts with companies that are owned, influenced, or affiliated with these countries. But it doesn't stop with China. It also touches on other countries and bans state business with Iran, with North Korea, Russia, Cuba, and Venezuela. Now, South Dakota is setting the example on how to fight China, but the next part of this blueprint may be the most important one yet. We need to protect America's food supply from the growing influence of the Chinese Communist Party. And we need other states to help us and to follow our lead as well. I've been involved in growing America's food my entire life. When I was just a young girl working on a farm and ranch with my family, we raised livestock and crops. We fed the world. That's what farmers do. Is that we get up every single day, we borrow money from a bank, put it in the dirt, hope the sun will shine, and that you can harvest something that will feed your neighbors and people all the way across the world. Our farmers do it better than anywhere else. And it's important that we have farmers in this country to keep our food supply here at home where we can control it. Now, my dad was killed when he was just 49 years old on our operation. I was still attending college at the time, and it devastated us. It turned our whole life upside down. We had a large operation, and he was our leader, but suddenly he was gone. I remember it was just a few months after that that we got a letter in the mail from the IRS that said we owed death taxes. We had land and machinery and cattle, but we didn't have any money in the bank. And all of a sudden, the federal government said we owed them money because our dad had been killed. It made me angry. I could not believe that the IRS would take a tragedy and then use it as an opportunity to take away our family business. So I got involved. I started showing up at meetings. I started going to farm policy debates, became passionate about tax policy. At the time, our US Senate Majority Leader was Tom Daschle, and I think he probably got tired of seeing my face. I served on farm policy boards, and in 2006, I ran for the state legislature, where I served for 4 years, and also as Assistant Majority Leader. I was then asked to run for Congress for the first time, and I'll admit, for quite some time, my husband and I said no. We were much more interested in staying in South Dakota and farming and ranching. The entire time, though, after I got elected to Congress and I continued to work on ag and tax policy to make it easier for our farmers to make a living off the land, but also to allow them to continue to feed the world, during that time, I kept ringing the alarm as to what the Chinese Communist Party was doing in grabbing a hold of our food supply. For years, they had been building up and buying our chemical companies, buying up our fertilizer companies. They've been purchasing food processing systems for years. In fact, they own the largest pork production facility in my state. Today, they're trying to buy up our land. The Chinese Communist Party knows that if they control our food supply, then they will control the United States of America. Just look at how difficult it was to even find food at different times during this pandemic. Imagine if the Communist Chinese decided to intentionally disrupt our food supply. Imagine the damage they could do, the fear parents would feel when they couldn't feed their children, the control that they would have over us. They will be able to do it if we don't take action to stop them. This is a national security issue. In fact, between 2010 and 2020, the Chinese Communist Party's holdings of U.S. agricultural land increased by 5,300%. They now own more than 350,000 acres in the United States, valued at over $2 billion. We have 40 million acres that are owned by other countries and foreign entities in this country. We know exactly what the Chinese Communist Party wants with our land. They want to control us. Last year, you may have heard about some land up in North Dakota that was purchased by a Chinese affiliated company that they said they were going to build a corn processing plant on. There were two details about this purchase that were confusing and raised suspicions. Number one, there wasn't enough corn in that area to support a plant like they were talking about. Number two, it was just a few miles away from a U.S. Air Force base where substantial capacity of our drone technology and our weapons are housed. Now, just in the last couple of weeks, since we've been drawing attention to this for months, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force wrote a letter stating that the project presents a significant threat to our national security. The mayor of Grand Forks and the city council have now spoken out against the project. They previously supported it, and they are now blocking construction. The governor of North Dakota and their elected leaders and delegation have spoken out as well. That's all really good news. But we can't sit back and wait for more of these instances to happen. We need to put processes in place to stop these projects before they even begin. The federal board that is supposed to block these kinds of purchases is claiming that their hands were tied in that instance in North Dakota. They are refusing to act to help stop it. In South Dakota, we have Ellsworth Air Force Base, and we are very proud of this Air Force Base and what it means to our country. It is significant to our nation's defense because it is a critical platform that will defend us far into the future. It's also a terrific benefit to our state's economy. It is now going to be the first home in the United States of America that will host the brand new B-21 bomber. It is going to keep our nation safe for years to come. This base is important to our country because of many things. Its location is key. It is near to key training airspace that we need for every one of our pilots to be able to train in. It's landlocked. It's not on the coast, which means it is less prone to surveillance by enemy subs, ships, and other threats. Because it's located so far north, it can defend us from attacks over the North Pole. And the area is not highly populated, which makes it easier to detect unusual activity. Now, the Chinese Communist government wants intelligence on that bomber. You better believe that they do. And one way for them to get it would be to buy land near Ellsworth Air Force Base, conduct surveillance on the activities, the operations, and the build out there. Well, not on my watch. This legislative session, I have brought a bill working with state legislators that would ban the Chinese Communist Party and other countries that hate us from purchasing ag land in South Dakota. This bill creates a Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, South Dakota, that is at the state level. It will rely on ag experts, national and security experts, legal counsel to review all of these purchases, lands, leases, and transfers of South Dakota ag land. If these purchases are made by a foreign person, company, or entity, they will make a recommendation to me as the governor whether the purchase should be approved or not be approved. And if the purchase comes from a nation that hates us and it hates America and wants to destroy us, well, then it's not going to go forward. Other states across the country are planning to take action as well. We've already seen similar bills come forward in states like Texas, Florida, Virginia. That's all good news. They're watching South Dakota to see how we lead. If we fail here, that will also have a ripple effect across the country. The America First Policy Institute recognizes how important these pieces of legislation are. Just 2 weeks ago, Steve and Adam came from AFPI to South Dakota to help educate our South Dakota legislators why this bill is so important. They explained the countless ways that China is threatening our American way of life. South Dakota is taking a stand against communist China, but it is going to take more than just us governors to step up and to keep our nation safe. You here at AFPI are doing it as well by doing education at the state level and to the public about the real threats that we face. We need united people. We need a strong country to protect our last best hope for our children and for our grandchildren. Now, South Dakota's state motto is under God, the people rule. That could just as easily be the American motto. In America, we are not, and we will not be, ever ruled by an elite class of so called experts. We, the people, are the government. In South Dakota, the people elected me, someone who was just a farm kid, to be our state's CEO. I raised my hand and I took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the great state of South Dakota and the Constitution of the United States of America. I upheld that oath and I defended freedom for all of our South Dakota citizens. And when I stood for reelection, they honored me by giving me more votes than any other candidate for governor in our state's history has ever had. I can't thank the people of South Dakota enough for their trust and for their faith that they put in me. But what I can do is I can get up every single day and I can work and I can focus on them, and I will continue to do that. I will defend their freedom. I'll use the authority that I have granted to me by the U.S. Constitution and the South Dakota Constitution to stop communist lockdowns from ever taking hold in South Dakota. I will protect my people from the Communist Party spying on them with their phones, devices, computers, and networks. I will stop nations that hate us from purchasing our ag land and becoming our neighbors. I will continue to advance the blueprint of a statewide response to the Chinese communist threat. This is my commitment to the great people of South Dakota. And that's my commitment to each and every single one of you in this room today. We do not have a president in the White House who is willing to make a similar commitment. We do not have a commander in chief that's willing to stand up to the greatest external threat that our nation faces. But the 50 states still retain their sovereignty. If President Biden will not stand up for freedom and the security of people, you better believe that I will. I will continue to put South Dakota first and America first. And I hope that other states will continue to follow our lead. So thank you. And may God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Well, thank you very much, Governor Noem. You've covered a lot of ground in your remarks, and it's greatly, greatly appreciated to see you leaning into this cause in the states. I do think that there's a truism in life that successes need successes to build upon, and so you've gotten that boulder rolling, I think, in the right direction, made an innovative proposal that look forward to talking through in a little bit of detail this afternoon with you, and thank you very much for coming to the America First Policy Institute. In your remarks, you alluded to the...
And Steve actually came to South Dakota in January.
Yeah.
So
the cold
we're very
was
proud
wonderful.
of you.
Yeah, well,
very proud
it was
of
a
you.
warm welcome under the
Yes.
Capitol Dome.
Yes.
Outside, not so much. But it was a wonderful visit, and thank you for your hospitality there. We had some interesting conversations with key stakeholders. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the strategic backdrop on China, because over the arc of your career, you've seen this change. America made a bet that engagement, giving a great deal of access to technology and money and to our leadership, would change the behavior of a hostile government to one where our differences would narrow and our opportunities for cooperation would expand. And then you also made clear what some of the articles of indictment were about the results of that bet. They are much better off now in using what used to be the tools of freedom to attack our institutions and to actually control people. And it's up to us to build a new policy foundation from the grassroots up. The China Policy Initiative here at the America First Policy Institute really doesn't look at China as a foggy bottom or State Department problem. It's a whole of society challenge, in that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't limit itself to its foreign ministry in trying to influence us. It uses every opening given to them. And it's quite a task to try to change that aircraft carrier of conventional policy. But with friends and allies around in the States, I think we're beginning to do that. We think that getting an America First policy toward China begins with getting America right first. A return to energy independence, unleashing the vitality of manufacturing and opportunity in our society, balancing trade. One of our colleagues, former U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Bob Lighthizer, is very adamant about there is no such thing as national security without getting trade and the economic piece right. And so oftentimes, one of the first things that we will get asked is, as you alluded in your remarks, isn't this really a federal issue? And what can we really do in the states? I appreciated you outlining some targets of opportunity in that, but could you maybe begin with diving a little deeper into why this really is a state and community issue? After all, one of the greatest attacks on the American family and community right now, post-COVID, is fentanyl coming across our borders and attacking our families, communities, and institutions. And so we'll talk more about ag land, but as you noted, the threats are numerous. But this federal versus state, could you dive in a little bit more about the power of the states taking action?
Yeah, I would say it may be a little bit of a different conversation for a governor to be sitting in front of you talking about national security or foreign policy issues such as that. But at this time where you have a real lack of leadership at the federal level and a president that is taking no action and weakening our country just from his inability to even speak to a situation that clearly is threatening our freedom is an amazing point in time in history. So it's more important than ever that we as governors stand up and do all that we can do to protect our citizens. That's the oath that we take. In addressing this bill that would be limiting the ability for foreign countries such as China to buy ag land in our state, we set up a model that looks much like the federal model. Most of you may be very familiar with the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. That is a federal level board that is supposed to be evaluating these kinds of purchases and deciding that if it's not in the best interests of America, rejecting them and making a recommendation to the leadership in this country to not allow that type of investment to go forward. Well, it's not working. In the situation up in North Dakota next to the Air Force Base, in fact, that committee weighed in and said specifically that their hands are tied. They could do nothing to stop that type of purchase going forward when even our leadership within the Pentagon, within DOD is saying this is a real security threat. That committee's not doing their job. So that's why it's a very different bill that we have in South Dakota, but it's one in a process that we've proven at the federal level people are familiar with that would allow a board to be set up with experts. It would be my general counsel. It would be my secretary of ag and natural resources. It would be experts on national security on this board, people that would come to that table with knowledge of the ag industry, also knowledge of national security that would evaluate that purchase and then make a recommendation to whoever the governor is, me or the next governor down the road. And then it would be able to be decided if that purchase should go forward or not. The reason that we're taking a different approach is because we want to be friendly to business. South Dakota does not want to limit people's ability to sell and buy their land and do business, and we want certainty for people that come into our state. But we also want to make sure that we put America first. Other states are bringing forward bills to address China buying up ag land in their states, but it's outright bans. And they just say that if it's a foreign entity, you're not allowed to purchase any land. Well, sometimes there may be research capabilities with friendly countries, with people that are our allies, where that purchase may be appropriate or maybe something that a long term lease could be appropriate. But if it's China, if it's North Korea, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, these countries that clearly do not have our best interests at heart, then the governor has all the information in front of them to make the best decision to protect the country. And that's why we took the approach that we took, is because it was something people would be familiar with. We'd have the experts at the table. It's another level of security that we can offer, and it's not an outright ban, which I think a lot of times when people come in and try to do an outright ban, you set a precedent for when that fails and people challenge it and they show that it's not working, they can completely remove it and that security net isn't there anymore. My goal all the time is we have every policy, we have every bill we bring in South Dakota. My staff has to give me a bill analysis. They have to tell me what happens if this bill becomes law? What happens if this bill doesn't become law? Answer all these questions on costs and fiscal notes. The last question on that bill analysis has to be, what does this mean to the next generation? It causes everybody in my office to not just think about what politically works for us in the 6 months that are coming after this. It's what happens in 10 years from now? What happens 20 years from now if we allow this to go forward the way that it is? It causes us to really think long term about the strategic impact of policy, how it can be defended in court and set up a precedent that actually helps us protect our state, but also protect our country in what we're doing every single day by the work that we do.
There's a couple elements, Governor, that you just shared that is in part what drew us at AFPI toward learning more about this model and considering how it might be applicable to other issues and in other states. What you put forward is clearly a flexible model that allows for interaction. As we've all learned, if we have a moment in the executive branch, you see that maybe not every policy works exactly as intended at launch. And so allowing for an interactive process to learn and grow and adapt is seemingly an advisable way to move forward. But if you could share a little bit without letting the gory details out in public, but under that Capitol dome, you have a lot of stakeholders in your state, and you met with some questions that were coming up about how this might affect different groups or constituencies. And Adam and I did have the privilege of seeing you and your colleagues in action, talking through how to actually roll this out. Could you share a little bit about what some of those key concerns were? I mean, for everyone who hasn't not necessarily spent their lifetime in a large agricultural state, to have almost all of the associations related to ag having pretty strong questions at the outset under a normal legislative session might have spelled a pretty severe challenge. And you seem to have come through and assured them about what you were describing just now. But could you address a little bit how you met those concerns to be able to move this policy forward?
So months ago, I started talking to organizations, associations in the state about bringing a bill like this to make sure that the North Dakota situation never did happen in South Dakota. And we knew that we had purchases of our land in our state being made by foreign entities, but we didn't know who they were or what their real intentions were. A lack of reporting at the state level showed what we didn't know and that we needed to know what was going on within our borders. And talking to all them about what a bill might look like or solutions that they might have, most of my ag organizations came out not willing to work with us on a bill. I think you guys all know that human nature is status quo is easier, right? And so I think that's where a lot of them landed. And in continuing to work with them and ask them what kind of solutions they had, they didn't bring us back any solutions. And I understand that it's easier not to address something, but that's not my job every day. My job is to get up and not complain about things, it's to fix them. And so we brought this bill with something that we knew would have the capacity to work. And they still have some questions about it, but I would say in South Dakota, our largest industry is agriculture. We do rely on foreign trade. I think they're concerned that China would punish us by not buying our soybeans, would punish us by not buying our commodities. Although I've worked on trade agreements when I was in Congress for the 8 years I was there, I worked with Ambassador Lighthizer and know him well from those negotiations back and forth and know that that's not how our trade agreements work. And no matter what, you can negotiate the best trade agreement in the world with China, they'll still screw you with their regulatory practices. So it doesn't matter, they don't love us and they'll do anything they want to try to harm us. So that's our problem that in South Dakota they don't want to be punished, but they don't recognize the way we get the best respect and the best economic value from anything that happens with another country is that we show strength and we stand by our values and our principles. So they may not always come on board. Agriculture is our largest industry. It's 8 times larger than our next biggest industry. So that's how big of a presence it has. Although I'm very proud of the fact that when we went up and talked about this bill in South Dakota and the first committee hearing that we had, we talked about the national security threat that we have, the responsibility that we have as a state by hosting Ellsworth Air Force Base, responsibility we have as a people because the B-21s will be in South Dakota, that we have to do things right and make sure that it's protected. The bill came out of the first committee hearing yesterday, 7-0, unanimous support, and I'm hopeful it can keep that momentum all the way through the legislative process.
Well, I think you'd made some really compelling points at the beginning of that conversation. Surely our farmers want to grow product to feed the world, as you mentioned, and we want to support that. At the same time, they also love the land and love America, and they don't want the Communist Party to be their neighbor. And the process that you put forward seems to me to be kind of twofold. One is to review, but it's also to serve as a partner with them because it can be hard just being in the American heartland to try to understand who are you really doing business with. And our federal government is, I would say, diplomatically imperfect at being able to help work with and help people understand with whom they're doing business or where this money is really going. In our conversations with you and your staff, it became very, very clear that this would be an interactive partnership on trying to roll that forward to help increase awareness, help people understand how to work with this process. It's not meant to be punitive. But if I got any of that wrong, please correct me.
No, I just think it would be that's what's we have been open to any kind of a suggestion that ag organizations would have or any outside organization on how they could improve the bill too. So I think that's what's been pretty special about South Dakota being a smaller state. We can be very nimble we can do things quickly and then we can prove out, almost be a pilot project for the country on things that are possible and show that they work so that they can be perpetuated. So, our organizations and outside interests know that we're interested to constructive problem solving. We haven't seen it yet very much on this bill, but I think the legislators are making the right decision. I constantly have to remind them, I'm a farmer and a rancher. My lieutenant governor is a rancher. When you run for governor in South Dakota, you choose your lieutenant governor to run as a team. And I will tell you that when I first got the nomination to run for governor, every person that had any political experience said you have to choose a business person. Because you're a farmer, go pick a Sioux Falls City businessman to run with. And instead, I picked a West River rancher from one of the smallest towns because I knew that he had fortitude and strength and conservative fiscal and social viewpoints, and that if something happened to me, he could pick up the reins and take over too. And we ran as the first farmer rancher governor, lieutenant governor, and won, we believe, in the history of the country. I don't think there's ever been another governor, lieutenant governor, where they both have made their income from agriculture, and we're the ones bringing this bill. Our whole families are still involved in growing this food. So I hope that reminds people we don't have an outside interest other than if we lose America, where do we go?
Right.
Where do we go where we will be better off and more free? There just isn't anywhere else. So this is our last stand.
Well, there's something very, very special about land, uh, and our farmers know that. The Chinese Communist Party is not known for quality control or really caring about the future. And as you and your constituents know, if something happens to that land, that's not an on-off switch that can be remedied. That could be generational in impact. It is a strategic resource that should be looked at, just as clean access to water and other vital things. So, if we have a Communist Party of China that was so poor on quality control that it allowed infant formula to poison its own children, obviously was willing to allow a virus out into the world and lie about it, uh, and that is currently poisoning the world with a manufactured chemical that's in league with cartels and an open border. Uh, Hopefully, people are awakening to the fact that we as Americans did not seek a conflict. We are not out there marching toward a war, but we want actually to avoid a war. We would like to contain these malign influences short of having that war. But Beijing, under Xi Jinping especially, has made a very different choice.
Mhm.
The balloons might be the most innocuous of things that are being sent our way, and they're still unwelcome and need to meet their demise. Uh, as you have engaged in this conversation, I'm curious to get a sense for what your constituent feedback has been. AFPI on State of the Union night had a program where we had real time reading of where voter issues were state by state. And it was interesting. In a lot of states, household issues were really high, but China was getting up there as something that the American people were dialed in. It's kind of the corporate media and the establishment that try to marginalize or minimize it. But as you've leaned into this as a governor and on this topic of ag land, what have you found the public response to be outside of sort of the interest jujitsu that goes on in the Capitol?
Oh, man, you opened up a box there. I would say the public is very concerned about what they see for China flexing its muscles. We've talked a lot about, them manipulating their currency for years. It's been a talking point in the news about IP and, the danger we have from them stealing that consistently and using it against it. While we meanwhile are very dependent on their products and the commerce that we do. I would say it became very real during COVID. Is really when we saw how China will use something like that to grab control and power. And that's when people started watching what was happening in other countries and then realizing the very next week they could see it in their own neighborhood. So that's what awakened, I think, the general public to the real threat that China is, and they started to learn more. Listen, these balloons that are alarming to me. What I wonder is what don't we know? What are they meant to distract us from? What do we have right now in our waters for subs and ships that are enemy combatants that they want us looking to the sky when we're not looking somewhere else? What are the other threats that they are taking in the action that they're taking while we're focused on this? So the American public, I think right now, and especially if we see countries such as Russia and China team up at the same time, will we be able to withstand that kind of a threat? And will our people be able to hold the line on being uncomfortable to do it? We've seen what China will do to its people in order to gain more power and control. Can the American people withstand that? Just to be free? We haven't had to face that kind of a question for a very long time. My fear is we've raised some generations that we haven't been out there talking to the public and educating them on why we need to make the decisions that we make and why we fight um, threats such as China, and that truly are vulnerable. So that's the important work that AFPI does, is that you're out there educating the public and local legislative leaders so they can carry the message, because we haven't done that in a very long time, and we're seeing right now the real danger that has happened because of that lack of education.
Well, unfortunately, we are not blessed with a great communicator as commander in chief at the moment
That's
to
true.
help guide America through this kind of a challenge. One thinks back
They
to,
literally, the White House has said to us as governors, we don't know what they are, these balloons. We don't know. We shot them down, but we have no idea what was in them. And there may be thousands of them. We don't know.
oh,
That's the guide. They said the one thing we do know is that we were told we need to communicate with you more. So,
well,
so
that
that
knocks me back on
that's
my heels. I have to think that General Kellogg has to be knocked back by if the government is saying we
that
don't
was
even know
yeah.
what this is, but we're
We
just
don't know
shooting
what
it
this is,
down.
but we're shooting them down, and there may be thousands of them. Thank you.
But your voice leaning into this, and fellow governors leaning into this, engaging the public, I think we have data-driven evidence that the American people are aware of this challenge. The American people are hungry for what they can do. You have come here and very helpfully outlined three different areas that are a priority for you to lean into in South Dakota, that others can choose if those are the right three for them. One of the beauties of America is federalism, and even neighboring states don't do things identically. But when the people see that something good has been done, and all of my friends know that I try to end with a TV line because TV is the source of all truth. But Fred Thompson, the late great Fred Thompson, when he's on television, he told his fake assistant district attorney, Jack, it's not enough to do good, you have to be seen doing good. And so for you to be seen doing good in South Dakota is a wonderful down payment on getting the America First approach to China and our response to this challenge right. We just want to express our gratitude to you on that. I also would welcome the continuation of a conversation on the positive alternatives to engaging with China. We built this manufacturing hub for the world. 20 to 30 years ago, a third of the soybeans were not going there. And if we do things right with our own hemisphere and those who don't hate us around the world, there should be a positive on ramp that we can take to move away from feeding and strengthening an enemy who hates us. But Governor Noem, I want to thank you for your hospitality and thank you for your leadership in this issue.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
One more. Test, test. There we go. Let's give one more round of applause to the great Governor Kristi Noem. Thank you, Governor. And it is true, we were talking about Hereford cattle on the walk into the room. That absolutely happened. Just a couple of quick closing thoughts, and then we'll let you go for the day. When the United States infantry fighting in the Boxer Rebellion found itself before the gates of the Forbidden City in Beijing in the summer of 1900, there was no obvious way to breach them. Finally, its commanding officer called for a volunteer. He said, "Who would take an American flag, climb the walls, and opened the way. A young man from the Iowa plains named Calvin Titus replied. He said, "I'll sure try, sir." He did it, and he entered immortality in the annals of American arms by climbing with his pistol and the stars and stripes to the top of the gate and holding off the enemy until his comrades arrived. It took a Midwesterner then, perhaps it takes a Midwesterner today to continue leading the way for the fight against the great threat that is the Chinese government. God bless you all. Thank you for being here and thank you for supporting this great work. Have a great day.
Great. Communications officer at the American First Policy Institute. We just wrapped up great speech and fireside chat with Governor Kristi of South Dakota talking about the threat that is posed by China and how, because the current administration is lacking in its response to it, falls on the nation's governor. Governor Noem is obviously taking that lead. So many other governors are taking steps to protect our country against the threat posed by China. The discussion was moderated by Steve Yates, who was a former deputy national security advisor to then Vice President Dick Cheney, who's now the head of the China Policy Initiative at the American Foreign Policy Institute. And he leads our across effort across all angles in dealing with China. You can see people are just lingering here for the last few minutes as we wrap this up. One of the things I do want to point out before we get here is that this is not the end. This is a great beginning where you start to see governors coming to the America First Policy Institute. A lot of times you see Congress people, members of the Senate. But this is one of our first governors here in our DC offices. And shortly after we get done with that, we're actually going to switch gears and move to the Black History Month events on Friday. Great event for that. I think we've actually pulled Steve off the stage and away from the bright lights. Steve, great job.
Thank
Great
you very much.
discussion.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful. It's great to have a governor who is actually leading by action. We have a lot of people in public life that talk the talk, and it's great to see someone putting an oar in and pulling.
Yeah, I think one of the things that and we say it kind of jokingly, but it's dead serious. I mean, the China balloon, TikTok. I think those are very easy concepts for people to grab. When we've known about the threat for a long time, it wasn't easily manifested in something where the public could just see it right there in front. Now it's on the forefront.
Exactly right. I mean, you know from communications that there's just no substitute for being able to see, feel, touch, smell something that makes it real. It's not just some kind of an egg-headed expert coming in to try to say that the sky is falling. You can actually look up and see a balloon up in the sky getting shut down. So I think it did help give a degree of clarity to the motivations of the government that brings this threat to our shores.
Yeah, and I think it was great too. Obviously, you were in South Dakota with your colleagues about a week or two ago, talking to the legislature. This is not this is the first, but it's not the last time we'll be doing this.
It's not. No, AFPI is very, very engaged in all of the states. We want to be an active, collaborative partner that shows up, brings research, brings fact sheets, brings expert testimony. We're really, really blessed to have colleagues who have been at the top of government, worked in multiple different agencies, have been practitioners. And we're not there to tell people what they need to do in their states as much as to give them a sense of confidence about what the pillars of good policy would be, and they can adapt it to local realities and conditions. So that's what the partnership with South Dakota did. And we're certainly looking to dive in with other states around the country.
Well, I think that it's such a great opportunity because, I mean, so many states, I've spent most of my career in state government. We have plenty of economic experts and business development experts. And, but when it comes to something like China, where this has really been traditionally more of a national issue, finding that local intellectual capital to be able to educate, to help refine that policy is just so important.
It's exactly right. So there's expertise, but there's also just feeling comfortable that what you're doing is right. Sometimes people from the federal government show up and they're not really there to help. They're to tell you not to do things. And so to help our people at the states feel confident that A, this is correct based on the U.S. Constitution and good American policy, and B, that their essential judgment at the grassroots is accurate. And they should stick to their guns and basically draw a line for who can and come into their state, who can own their assets, who can interact with their children, things like that. And we as conservatives don't want the federal government to be the first line of defense for that. Having that foundation at the grassroots and state level is key to holding this right for the next generation.
I think that was one of the most interesting from my standpoint. The parts of the discussion with Governor Noem was how they debated between a ban and having a process, much like we have at the federal level, to dealing with these kinds of threats.
That's right. But the big advantage of having a process at the state level versus the federal level is no individual out there in the fruited plain feels like they can be on an even keel in engaging with the federal government on these things. But at the states, especially in rural and low population states, you can be at the table talking with the real leaders of your government and they'll listen to you. If you go before the federal CFIUS board, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, you're just kind of one atom in the universe and you can kind of be marginalized and ignored. So that's why we like having a process that is closer to the people and more responsive to the people, give them confidence, but there's higher batting average for success if we go this route.
Outstanding. Thanks, Steve. I know you've got a lot of people who are trying to get some of your attention. Great discussion today. We're also now is a great opportunity for us to bring in my boss, the executive director of the American First Policy Institute, former acting secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf. What do you think of today's event?
Well, it's such a great event. It's a real pleasure to have the governor here. As she indicated, because the Biden administration is really not taking this threat seriously, you got to have action. You got to have leadership from the states. And obviously, Governor Noem is doing that in South Dakota. So a number of things that she outlined, I think, is useful. It's really a blueprint. It's a blueprint for other states, but it's also probably a blueprint for some federal action as well.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that Steve and I were talking about is, we're doing so much of this at so many different policy levels. This being more of a national, international issue really allows us to bring that for a few other governors, other localities that are trying to get this kind of thing done.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think what it tells you is not all the good ideas are here in D.C., right? Which I think a lot of folks think that they are. You really get some innovative ideas out in the states. And the governors that are willing to step up and take on such a big issue. I thought her comments were really interesting, which is normally you don't have governors weighing in on national security and foreign policy issues like this. But when you see a not leadership at the federal level, and you see that gap or that vulnerability, then you got to step into the breach. And that's certainly what she's doing here. And I think others around the country and other governors need to do the same. We're starting to see that in a couple of other smaller states and bigger states, I would say. Texas is one. But they really got to step up to this.
I think it's also an opportunity for us because even no matter the issue, whether it's China, whether it's education choice, we can kind of pick and choose, see what the best policies are working at the state level, and then help interested governors on a host of different issues of how to bring those together.
Yeah, we often talk about the states being the laboratories, and that's where you test out things, and that's where you kick the tires on a lot of this. And it's much easier to do in a smaller state, such as South Dakota and others out there. See, hey, what works, and you can build that support at the state level, and then grow it into more of a national movement. So hopefully that's what we see here. But again, I think this goes back to the Biden administration not really talking about having a strategy on that maligned influence that we see from China. It takes a governor to step up to the microphone and to put out legislation at the state level that others can look at as well.
I think this would rank as one of the larger events that we have hosted. Obviously, our first governor as well, media interest nationally, but a lot of folks in the seats. So I think there is that appetite out there.
Well, I think overall, a lot of the monthly events that we do here at AFPI, the audience continues to grow. And then when you get in such a dynamic speaker like Governor Noem on such a hot topic, such as what are we going to do about China, looking at agricultural land and other things in states, those two sort of influences came together and made this event wildly successful. But I think overall, a lot of the events are successful because people are longing for that America First approach on a variety of issues across the board.
I'm feeling she won't be the last governor.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you, Chad.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us. We will be back on Friday with a really an extended, long, multi-hour presentation on Black History Month. It's going to feature some of the great leaders in the America First movement, in the Black community, something I'm sure you're going to enjoy. So stay tuned and make sure you see that on Friday. I'm Mark Lauder, Chief Communications Officer for the America First Policy Institute. We'll see you next time. Thank you.